When the ambulance dropped me off at my doorstep, the world seemed smaller than when I left it. It was as if every branch of my front tree had shrunk, as if even the wind was afraid to touch me. I got out slowly, holding the handrail, my pulse still racing from the last medication I received at the hospital. The smell of 70% alcohol still lingered in my nostrils. I could feel the plastic of the oxygen mask even though I wasn't wearing one. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the metallic noise which came from my garage. First came a snap, like when someone fits a machine part together. Then a muffled laugh. And then a strong acidic smell of industrial paint mixed with hot grease. That smell didn't belong in my house. It never had. It pierced my chest like a strange memory. An intruder breathing inside my recollections. I took 2 more steps. The garage door was open. Wide open. The fluorescent light inside flickered as if it were nervous about my arrival. For a moment, I thought it was a hallucination. The hospital messed with my sleep, my senses, my patience, but not with my lucidity. Inside the garage, my sacred place, my refuge since my wife left, there was 2 people I'd never seen before. One of them was holding a screwdriver. The other had his back turned, painting a metal bar as if he were restoring a workshop that never existed there. But what really struck me was seeing my shelves ripped out. The car was covered by a dirty tarp, and my boxes, marked with my wife's name, were thrown into a corner like rubble. And there, in the midst of the chaos, my nephew Daniel, arms crossed, watching people work as if he owned the place. When he saw me, he smiled. But it wasn't the smile of a nephew seeing his uncle return from the hospital. It was the smile of someone who had already decided something for you. "Oh, uncle, you arrived earlier than I expected." His voice vibrated with a confidence that didn't match the memory I had of the boy whose knee I used to bandage. I stood there at the door, unable to go in. My chest tightened, not from the pain of being hospitalized, but from a much older pain. The pain of realizing that someone you love now sees you as an obstacle. Daniel took 2 steps toward me, wiped his hand on his shirt, an expensive designer shirt, and said with a nonchalance that cut through my last defenses, "The garage now belongs to the company, okay? We've already set everything up. We're not leaving." That's how it was. Cold, direct, no room to breathe, no room for memory. Before I continue, subscribe and tell me what time it is where you are right now. I tried to say his name, but my voice came out weak, thin, almost childlike. He looked at me with pity. And pity, coming from someone you helped raise, hurts more than any hospitalization. "Uncle, you need to rest. Relax. I took care of everything here. I took care of it." The word kept swirling in my head like a dirty echo. I walked to the garage threshold and placed my hand on the wooden doorframe. The blue paint, the same one my wife and I had spent together one summer so hot we had to share a fan, was scratched, chipped, and torn off in pieces, as if an unknown hand had tried to erase my past in a hurry. The men working inside didn't even stop when they saw me. They continued tightening screws, dragging machines, stacking boxes marked with Daniel's company logo. None of them asked who I was. None of them found it strange that the homeowner was standing there, small, breathing heavily. That was no longer my garage. It was something else, a place where I was merely a spectator watching my own life fall apart. I closed my eyes and for a few seconds tried to remember the sound that garage made when I opened it in the morning. A soft old sound like a shy good morning. But that day, she didn't answer my good night, nor my welcome back. Daniel placed his hand on my shoulder, too heavy, too intimate, and said, "Look, uncle, let's avoid confusion. I've already invested a lot here. It's better to accept it." And in that instant, with the smell of ink burning my throat and strange sounds echoing in a space that was once mine, I realized I'm back from the hospital, but my house was still dealing with something far worse. I entered the house with the caution of someone treading on cracked ground, not because I was weak, although I still gasped for air when climbing stairs, but because the house felt uncomfortable with me, as if it were silently asking me, "Why did it take you so long to come back?" I closed the door slowly. The sound echoed differently. Before my hospitalization, that sound of wood banging always resonated along with the smell of coffee, the hum of the old radio that only picked up one morning station, and the distant laughter of the neighborhood children. Now everything seemed cleaner and sadder. The silence was so profound that I could hear the sound of my own wrist. I went to the kitchen, still with the hospital bracelet dangling from my arm. It kept slipping across my cold skin, a constant reminder that I hadn't fully returned yet, not to myself, not to anyone else. I picked up the blue agate teapot. It was where it always was, on top of the stove, slightly crooked with that superglue repair on the handle. I ran my finger along the crack as I've done ever since the day I fixed it after my mother died. It was my little survival ritual. And in that touch, I felt the memory that has always sustained me. My wife laughing while complaining that I never threw anything away. "You and your sentimental trinkets," she would say. And I would reply, They're the ones who keep us on the ground. But at that moment, I realized that my world had been shattered, not because of the disease, but by the blood of my own family. I made coffee in silence. The warm aroma filled the kitchen, but it didn't bring the usual comfort. It lingered like a memory you're no longer sure belongs to the present. I sat at the table in my usual spot, but with the feeling of occupying a stranger's chair. The house seemed bigger, as if it had gained a few meters of distance from me since my hospitalization. The furniture was where I left it, but I wasn't where they left me. I looked out the window toward the garage. The bright light was still on. My stomach churned when I heard another metallic noise, louder this time, as if something was being knocked over. It was my life being rearranged without my permission. I picked up the pocket watch I keep on top of the refrigerator. It had been there forever. A watch that no longer worked, but carried the weight of my father and the afternoons he spent teaching me how to fix things. I opened the lid. The internal spring made that same soft sound as always, a sound I would recognize even blind, even too old to remember anything else. Calm down, I whispered to myself. It was silly to talk to myself, but it would be strange not to talk. I got up slowly and went to the living room. The old floorboards creaked, but in a different way. It seemed as if even they were suspicious of me. As if they wanted to ask, "Are you sure this is still your home?" I approached the door that leads to the backyard. I pushed it open carefully, and the smell of the night surged in, mixed with paint, dust, and the distant scent of orange blossoms from the neighbor's house. The sound of the sparrows had already gone, replaced by male voices. Not the voices of my neighbors, not the voices of someone I should hear on my property. And all of that hit me again. I was alive, but my house, that was being occupied by another life, one that wasn't mine. I sat in the rocking chair near the back door. The wood creaked with that movement that had accompanied me for so many years that it now seemed like music, a sad but familiar song. The same chair where my wife liked to read, where she left a folded grey blanket on the backrest, and where I sat every night since she left. I looked at the lawn. The same lawn where Daniel used to run when he was a child, where he fell off his bicycle and scraped his knee, where I carried him in my arms saying, don't cry, we'll fix it." I've spent my life fixing the world for him. Now he was taking mine apart. The cough came on strong, bringing back recent memories of the hospital. The mask on my face, the monitor beeping, the smell of disinfectant, the doctor saying it was best for me to stay under observation for a few more days. I didn't argue. I never argue with doctors. But now I realized that during that time, someone argued with fate for me, because all Daniel had hoped for was a moment of weakness. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the house on the day I was admitted to the hospital. How it looked when I left. How it looked when I got into that ambulance. My last vision had been of the garage light turned off, the car quiet like an old animal resting, the smell of wood and grease mixed with the rain. I opened my eyes again and faced the present. The car was crammed full of boxes. The garage exuded a different smell, and I didn't know how to recapture the air of my own story. That night, while the tools continued banging away outside, I realized something inevitable. The illness weakened me, but the invasion aged me. And for the first time since my wife's death, I felt real fear. Not to die, but to disappear inside my own house. I sat in the rocking chair for a few minutes that felt like hours, gazing out at the backyard as if I were watching an old movie, one of those where you know every scene by heart. The past always returns slowly, first through smells, then through sounds, only then through memories. And that night, what returned was little Daniel, running awkwardly with his shoelaces undone, shouting, "Uncle, look at me." He was about 7 years old. His cheeks were chubby, his eyes curious, that restless air of someone who wants the whole world and still thinks he deserves it all in double. His older sister had always been calm, but Daniel, he was a storm from the cradle. I remember when his mother called me in a panic because he had disappeared in the park. I dropped everything, my job, my lunch, even the warehouse project I was finishing, and ran there. I found the boy sitting under a jequitiba tree, holding a leaf and trying to glue a broken branch to it as if that were some kind of solution. He looked at me and said, "If I fix it, nobody will fight with me." That phrase has never left me. A boy trying to fix the world before the world catches up with him. I hugged him and promised I would always be there for him. Promises made to children never die. They only turn into debts when we fail. Over time, Daniel grew up. Restlessness turned into ambition. A little ambition is good. It pushes life forward. Too much ambition runs over anyone in its path. I watched him finish high school, enroll in a vocational course, and begin to become the pride of the family. His mother used to say, "Daniel is too smart to have a boss." I smiled, but kept to myself the worry that someone without limits can become dangerous. Not because it's bad, but why do you think the world should open doors without asking for a key? When he turned 18, he asked me for a job in my small woodworking workshop. I worked slowly, calmly, carefully, And Daniel, well, he wanted quick results. He wanted to do everything at once. One day he dropped a piece that had taken 2 weeks to complete. I didn't scream. I never yelled at him. I just sat down next to it, picked up the broken piece and said, "We'll try again." He looked at me with that same boyish look that had just tried to glue the branch to the leaf. But now there was something different. The certainty that I would always be there to clean up the mess. Later, when Daniel decided to open a small motorcycle and tool restoration business, I was the one who lent him the money. Not much, but enough. No interest, no pressure. "Pay when you can," I said. He replied, "I will never forget that." But people forget. Not out of malice, for convenience. Over time, he prospered. He bought new machines, hired 2 employees, and started to win over big clients. He was pure talent, I can't deny that. But talent without humility is like a knife without a handle. That's when the first crack appeared. One day, years before I was hospitalized, he showed up unannounced. He asked if he could use my garage for some quick adjustments because his shed was full. It was only for an afternoon. I said yes. I always said yes. The afternoon turned into 2 days. 2 days turned into a week. 1 week it became a habit. I tried to talk to them. He said, "Uncle, you don't even use the garage. Relax." And I remained silent because he still saw the boy from the Jekitiba tree in him. But the truth is, I should have realized that back then. Daniel never looked at that backyard with affection again. He looked at it calculatingly, possibly, with the mindset of someone who no longer saw my house as a home, but as resource. I only truly understood this when I was in the hospital. When I woke up on the second night of my hospitalization, I heard the nurse saying in the hallway, "Doesn't that gentleman in bed number 6 have anyone to pick him up tomorrow?" That hurt. I had a family, or so I thought. I picked up the phone and texted Daniel. He saw it but didn't reply. He only got back to me hours later saying, "I'm dealing with something important, I'll stop by later." He never passed. And while I was trying to breathe without the machine, my garage, my last piece of life with my wife, was being taken over, rearranged, invaded by the ambition of someone I helped raise. I didn't see it, but I felt it. There is a silent pain that only those who live alone know. The pain of knowing that during your absence, no one waited for you. Back in the present, sitting in the rocking chair, I looked at the stopped clock in my hand and realized a bitter irony. Time stood still for me, but it was too fast for Daniel. He stopped being the boy who tried to fix leaves. He's become the kind of guy who breaks whatever he wants and expects you to fix it. And in that instant, in that chair, with the sound of the machines invading my night, I finally understood. The Daniel I loved as a son no longer existed. What we had now was someone capable of burying me alive inside my own house and still calling it a favor. The truth is that no family tragedy arrives screaming. She arrives politely. He arrives asking for just a minute, just a favor, just today. And before you know it, she's taken off her shoes, walked into your office, and is eating at your desk. That's how it was with Daniel. Before everything turned to ruin, there was a calm afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, drinking my freshly brewed coffee, that warm, earthy smell that always reminds me of my mother's lap. The sun was beginning to set behind the mulberry tree, and the wind carried the soft sound of dry leaves across the yard. It was an ordinary afternoon, so common that if I could, I would have stayed trapped in it forever. That's when Daniel arrived. He appeared with that impatient demeanor he always had, as if he were going somewhere too important to explain. He stopped in front of me, adjusted his backpack on his shoulder, and said in a tone too light for someone who had already been planning something, "Uncle, can I leave some boxes in your garage for a few days, just so they're not in the sun? It'll be quick, I promise." It was first stage, the stage of the innocent request. I didn't think. I didn't analyze it. I didn't measure anything. I simply said, "Of course, my son. You can leave it there." And in that instant, in that small and simple yes, I handed over the key to everything that would come after. The boxes arrived that same afternoon. They were large, heavy, and tied with nylon straps, the kind of thing people who work with machines, with metal, with strength, would use. I was surprised by the size, but I didn't question it. Daniel saw my look, and before I could open my mouth said, "It's only until Monday, at the latest." But when someone adds at most, the deadline is already compromised. On Monday, the boxes were still there. On Wednesday, 2 more arrived. On Sunday, there was already an entire row occupying the side of the garage. When I tried to ask what was going on, he laughed. "Relax, uncle. You hardly ever use this space. In fact, you should be grateful. I'm organizing things for you. You can even move around better now." Organizing, improving, moving. The words came sweetly but left a bitter taste. They seemed like affection, but they smelled of conquest. And so it began. Second stage, a pressure disguised as care. Daniel started coming more often, always with his speech ready. "Uncle, don't lift heavy things. Uncle, leave this to me. Uncle, you need to rest a little. At first I believed. I even liked that unexpected attention. It was nice to imagine that someone still cared about me, that old age hadn't erased my importance. But I realized slowly and painfully that this attention came with an ulterior motive, to distance myself, to shut me up, let me become dependent. Every time I tried to question the use of the garage, he would change the subject. Every time I said maybe that's too much, he would give me that offended look of someone who's just trying to help. It was almost like choreography, a dance I never asked to learn. The situation worsened weeks later when I started getting sick. First it was a persistent cough, then a fever, then that feeling of tiredness that seemed to come from a place that wasn't in the body but in the soul. Daniel himself drove me to the hospital, practically pushing the car door open for me to get in. "You need observation. You'll be fine." I thought it was beautiful. I thought that despite everything, he was still the boy I carried to the emergency room so many years ago. But I didn't understand his silence in the following days. Not even short answers. Not even the disappearance. I would call and ask, "How's everything going over there?" He replied, "Everything's all right, uncle, rest." But there was a tone in his voice. A tone of someone who is in a hurry to switch off and get back to what really matters. When the doctor decided to keep me hospitalized for a few more days, I tried to let him know. Daniel simply replied, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the house." And that phrase, and so gentle, so seemingly loving, was the final seal of second stage. Taking care of him wasn't about protecting him. It was silent permission to occupy. Because it was precisely while I was struggling to breathe among machines, trying to ensure I would have a few more years of life, that he initiated third stage, a complete violation. In my absence, he called workers, brought in machines, installed tools, rearranged my shelves, threw away boxes containing old photographs, dismantled the wooden bench my wife loved, and pushed my car into the corner as if it were a burden. He took away my past to make room for his future. On the third day of my hospitalization, a neighbor sent me a message. "Your nephew is doing a big renovation here. Has the garage been turned into a brand new warehouse?" My heart was racing when I read that. I tried calling him. He didn't answer. On the last day, the doctor discharged me with recommendations and medication. I left the hospital thinking I was going back home. I truly believed that. But when I opened the gate that late afternoon, when the sun was already hiding behind the roof, painting everything with that warm light that seems like a farewell, I realized that my house had ceased to be mine. And when Daniel looked at me and said in a firm voice, "We've already set everything up. We're not leaving," I understood. He didn't just take my garage. He took away the piece of trust I had in him. And nothing, absolutely nothing, hurt more than that. That night, after returning from the hospital, was the longest of my life. I tried to sleep, but every hammer blow, every muffled laugh, every box being dragged from the garage reminded me that I was being off wings inside. It wasn't just a physical invasion. It was a silent replacement for my existence. Around 2 in the morning, I got up. I couldn't stay in bed. The house was restless. And when the house is restless, you get up as if it were calling you. I walked to the kitchen window. The garage light was still on, casting strange shadows across the yard. The shadows moved as if they had a life of their own. And it was there, looking through that scratched glass, that I felt my limit break. I wasn't just fighting for a garage. I was fighting for the last thing that still made me feel part of the world. My space, my history, my memory. The next morning, my heart pounding like an old hammer, I dialed the police. I had never called them before. I never thought I would need it. The attendant's voice was monotonous, almost indifferent. I simply said, "My nephew broke into my garage. He brought people in, set up machinery, and is running a business inside my house. I need help." She asked for my address, confirmed the incident, and said, "A vehicle will be sent." I hung up and stood there motionless, with the phone trembling in my hand. I never imagined that one day I would call the police on someone in my family, much less on the boy I saw take his first steps in this backyard. 30 minutes later, I heard the sound of the engine approaching. The car stopped in front of my house, kicking up some dust from the road. 2 officers got out. One was young, with a shaved head and a steady gaze. The other was older, with a large belly and experienced hands, someone who had seen every possible version of family disappointment. They walked up to me. "Are you the owner?" "On. Where is the invaded area?" I pointed to the garage, and that was the first time I heard the word "invaded" said aloud. It hurt, but it hurt because it was true. The 2 officers walked to the door. The noise of the machine stopped immediately when they noticed their presence. The 2 workers, the ones who never asked me my name, came out slowly, half suspicious, half irritated. And then Daniel appeared. His expression changed when he saw the police officers. Not out of surprise, but out of calculation. It was like seeing gears turning behind his eyes. "Uncle, what's that for?" He wasn't angry. He was disappointed in me. And that's the kind of manipulation that cuts deeper than anger. The older police officer asked, "Do you have permission from the owner to operate here?" Daniel is crying. That laugh I've known since he was a child. The same laugh he gave when he wanted to hide that he had done something wrong. Of course I have it. My uncle gave me permission. He just forgets things. That sentence fell to the ground like a broken glass. Forget about things. He forgets. I felt the old ghost of humiliation rising in my throat. It wasn't just a lie. It was the beginning of a narrative. A new story to erase mine. The youngest of the police officers looked at me immediately, as if asking for confirmation. I took a deep breath. I never authorized anything beyond storing a few boxes for a few days. Daniel opened his arms theatrically. "Uncle, you're nervous. You were in the hospital. Your memory is failing. I'm just trying to help you." That helping you hit me like a slap in the face. To help. Help by destroying my garage? Could you help by erasing my wife's name from the shelves he threw away? Helping by occupying my home while I struggled to breathe? The older policeman asked for my documents. I went inside and grabbed the blue folder where I carefully keep everything. Property deed, property tax bills, old receipts. The folder still carried a faint smell of wood because I always kept it stored in the workshop's cabinet. We went back to the garage. The officer analyzed everything calmly. He flipped through it page by page. Then she looked at Daniel. "You have no contract nor written authorization, and you are operating industrial equipment in a residential area." Daniel's expression was not one of fear. It was out of irritation. A deep, proud, arrogant irritation. As if the world had forgotten that he deserves everything. He then attempted the move I feared most. "My uncle isn't doing well. He's confusing things. It's dangerous to leave him alone." I felt something inside me break. The illness that took me to the hospital didn't kill me. But that sentence almost killed him. The young police officer intervened. "Sir, please let your uncle speak for himself." And I spoke, in the firmest voice I could muster at that moment, with what little dignity remained. "I may be old, I may be tired, but I am not incapable. And this house is mine. The garage is mine. He entered without permission. He installed everything without permission. He lied, and I want him out." Silence. A silence so heavy it seemed as if even the machines had stopped to listen. The older police officer nodded. "For now, activities are suspended. Everything must be removed until further notice from the judge. If they continue operating, it will be considered trespassing, property damage, and illegal activity." The patrol car noted Daniel's name. He took my documents, and he left. Daniel stood in the driveway as if trying to figure out a new way to get around me. But for the first time since this started, I saw him when he was little, small as a 7-year-old boy trying to mend a sheet of paper. But now the broken branch was his bond with me. He stared at me and said, "You ruined everything." And he got into the car without looking back. At that moment I realized I hadn't finished with anything. I had only just begun to reclaim what was mine. In the days following the police visit, the house hung in the air, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next blow. The garage was silent, but not peaceful. It was a tense, unsettling silence, filled with things out of place, forgotten cables, metal dust on the floor, paint stains that weren't mine. I would open the door and feel the space staring back at me, asking, "Why did it take you so long to defend me?" Daniel did not return that day, not even in the next one, not even in the 4 days that followed. But I knew he wasn't running away. He was preparing the ground. On the 6th day, I received the summons to appear at the preliminary hearing. The paper trembled in my hand even before I began to read, not because of the content, but because it was strange to see my name and his side by side, separated by words like owner, invasion, legal protection. It was as if the justice system was classifying us into categories that life never imagined. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. The house breathed with me, slowly, tiredly, worried. I ran my hand along the living room wall, the same wall where my wife bumped her shoulder the night we danced for the last time, and said softly, "Stay with me a little longer." The next day I went to the forum with my pocket watch in my coat. It didn't work, but it was my ritual of courage. Each click of the rusty lid reminded me of my father saying, "A man who doesn't confront others becomes a shadow." And I refused to be a shadow in my own story. When I entered the waiting room, Daniel was already there. Handsome, well-dressed, smelling of expensive cologne, impeccable posture, as if he were going to an important event, not a hearing against the uncle who raised him half his life. He didn't even look up when I arrived. His lawyer was young, confident, and swamped with paperwork. Mine was a public defender who barely knew me. But sometimes the truth outweighs technique. When they called us, I went in slowly. The cold floor of the courthouse always reminds me of a hospital. Perhaps it is the silence. Perhaps it's the smell of cleanliness. Perhaps it's the fact that in both places we surrender our bodies and wait. The judge, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, began by asking, Lord, why are we here today? I breathed. I took a deep breath, and I spoke. I talked about everything, from the boxes that arrived for a few days, from machines installed without permission, emotional manipulation, from the invasion while I was hospitalized, the feeling of returning home and discovering that my life had been rearranged by ambition. The judge listened to me without interrupting. He wrote things down slowly, but her face said she had seen many Daniels in her life. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel gave a rehearsed sigh. Your Excellency, my uncle is confused. He always said I could use the garage, and he's not in good condition to remember because of his illness. It hit me like an invisible punch. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have any written authorization? Silence. He turned a little pale, then he said, It was all verbal. The judge continued, And do you have documents proving that those machines are essential and could not be installed in your own warehouse? More silence. His lawyer tried to intervene. Your Excellency, my client was simply trying to help. She raised her hand, asking for silence. Helping doesn't require taking possession. Then he looked at Daniel with a firmness that seemed to pierce him like a blade. You acted as if your uncle's vulnerability was an opportunity. And that, under the law, is not care. The decision came quickly, faster than I expected. Complete removal of the machines, fine for improper use of property. It is forbidden to install any structure there without written authorization. And recovery from the damage caused. Daniel didn't look at me. Not when the judge ended the session, nor when he got up from his chair, nor when the hallway swallowed us up in opposite directions. But as he passed behind me, I heard his voice, low, bitter, torn with wounded pride. You're too old for this. You could have just let me take care of it. I didn't answer. Not because there was no answer, but because any answer would fall short of the abyss he has dug between us. I went home alone. When I arrived, the garage was open. Daniel's men had begun to remove the machines. The shadows of the tools hung on the wall, like ghosts slowly emerging. I entered the space that was once mine. I touched the warped countertop, smelled the solvent still clinging to the walls, and saw the fresh scratches on the cement floor. It was as if someone had taken my heart and carved into it with metal tools. As I watched, I noticed something shining in the lower corner of the door, the pocket watch I gave Daniel when he turned 13. He dropped it when he hurried away, or maybe he left it on purpose, like a broken symbol of something that could no longer be fixed. I picked up the watch. I ran my thumb over the scratched lid. I let out a long sigh, a sigh that carried years of memories, of attempts, of second chances. And there, in that silent moment, I understood the harsh truth. The courts have given me back my garage, but it didn't bring my nephew back. At the end of that night, I sat in the rocking chair looking out at the backyard. The wind rustled the leaves of the Jequitiba tree, just as it did when Daniel was a child. For a second, I almost heard his child's voice saying, "Uncle, look at me." But it was just the wind. The wind always imitates the past to test us. I closed my hand over the watch, and I whispered, "Some things we save, others we let go." The house breathed with me, slowly, deep, like someone who understands. And when night finally fell, I realized that everything had changed, and yet life insisted on going on.